All right, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah,
وعليكم
today
السلام.
we're going to be continuing with Surah Al-Araf. But here's what I thought would be a really good idea to basically start off with our ayat. Of course, we were doing يا بني آدم إما يأتينكم رسل منكم يقصون عليكم آياتي فمن اتقى وأصلح فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. This is the ayah that we left off at yesterday. And we were going over Tafseer al-Qurtubi and talking about a number of different things in regards to وَلِكُلِّ أُمَّةٍ أَجَلٌ فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. There was something that I didn't actually get in details about. I'm not going to go in details, but I would just like to point one thing. In talking about this ayah, we came across something that al-Qurtubi had mentioned, a group called al-Mu'tazila, or another group called al-Qadariyya, or other groups, just different groups. And just wanted to mention, I don't usually focus on those groups on purpose because those groups, yes, we still have some people maybe adopting some of the ideas here and there, but those groups were influenced by the Greek philosophy or influenced by different philosophers and different, let's call it trends at the time. And these questions, such as the questions related to qadar, questions related to decree, and questions that relate to the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, are they for Allah? Do we describe the names and explain them metaphorically, or is this to be something that is explained basically the way that it is literally explained, and therefore not get into these metaphorical or philosophical types of explanations and definitions and redefining things? And that's basically Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they regarded that we don't need to get into all those types of extensive one explanations, whether figurative or metaphorical or any other way, and that we will just leave it as is. Number two, in speaking about the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't get into these types of explanations or trying to put in our own invented explanation, and we will just leave it as the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had explained it in. And the same thing when we're talking about qadar. How do we understand qadar? Do we understand the whole topic of decree? Do we understand it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically created this decree, or was this something that, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had foreknowledge about this decree, and in other words, whatever will you would choose and whatever behavior or whatever decision you would make, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had the foreknowledge, and that since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that created everything within the system of this universe, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has all the knowledge, and nothing goes past Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepting or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitting such matters to happen. That's basically Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Other groups, I don't like focusing on those groups. So how do we understand فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُم? How do we understand al-ajal? How do we understand that appointed time? How do we understand free will? How do we understand all of these different things? I usually like to stick to what Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah had said, and I don't like going into all these details, because reviving these cults and these interpretations that were already history is really a waste of time. Definitely, we don't want to do that. So continuing, يا بني آدم إما يأتينكم رسل منكم يقصون عليكم آياتي فمن اتقى وأصلح فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. That was the last ayah that we had explained. And we said that this was an announcement. This ayah is really similar to the ayah, at least in the concept of it. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. How is it similar or different? So the ayah that I just mentioned, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ, maybe I could show you that ayah right there so we could at least have you see it. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ. Here we go. And the problem is I don't have the letter Ra, so من ظهورهم, I'll just write it this way. Okay, and I'm sure the ayah. Here we go. All right, I'm gonna have you see this ayah right there, and then hopefully you can get an idea of how similar or different this ayah is is basically compared to that one. Okay, so that ayah, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ. It's also in Surah Al-A'raf. You could see it's in ayah 172, and we're going to come across that ayah in detail. Okay, here we go. وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. And then certainly you see these three diamond, whatever shaped right there. That actually tells you that you either stop here or you stop there. Okay. ألست بربكم قالوا بلى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. Okay. What does that ayah mean? And when your Lord Almighty took from the backs of Adam, or the children of Adam, his offsprings, and made them witnesses upon themselves, am I not your Lord? He said, that is. They replied, verily you are. We are witnesses to that. Yet on Judgment Day, you would say we had been pacified away from that. Or you would say, or they would say, that is, they would say, our forefathers have associated partners before us, and we basically had come as generations after them. And therefore, would you hold us accountable for what the later or what the previous had basically committed before us? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, and this is how we would send the detailed ayat, in other words, the detailed information, the detailed revelation, in order to give them the chance to return to their Lord Almighty. So now you could see, although the ayah is completely different than the ayah that we were just working on, but in terms of idea, when we're looking at the ayah that's really letting us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with أخذ ربك من بني آدم من ظهورهم, and letting us know that that combination that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had also taken from the children of Adam, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent basically throughout history the different prophets and messengers in order to give them that information. So I want you to look at this one. This one's actually talking about يقصون يأتينكم رسل منكم يقصون عليكم آياتي, and right there this ayah is basically giving us the same idea. نفصل الآيات ولعلهم يرجعون. نفصل الآيات. So yes, right there giving us one set of that information, because the information slash the wahi, or the revelation, basically goes into two sets. The first set is recognizing basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ألست بربكم, and that's tawheed right there. ألست بربكم. And then they would say bala. That bala is letting us know that there is a wiring within us where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created what would be called al-fitra. Al-fitra is more like a receptor, more of a receptor, a wiring that lets you know that there are certain things that you are looking to connect with. So think of it as you've got the receptor, you've got the router. Okay, and this router right there is seeking to connect basically with a connection, and that connection is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly the system, or this connector, is going to be the ruh. This connector, or this receptor, is basically going to be the ruh. Your own fitra is the router. Your own fitra is the router. It's seeking to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the method, or the system, that in order to connect both together is basically the ruh. And this is why it's important to, just see those combinations between these ayat in giving us the explanation. When the ayat says, Alastu bi that's to let us know that there is a system within you, and that is called al-fitra, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, that already is built to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. But here's the question. If we already are built to know that there is a creator or to believe in a creator, why did we necessarily need the prophets and the messengers to give us this information if the information is already built in? The information within you is built in, not to mean that you already believe in God and that you already know that there is God. It is within you to recognize that there is either something that is, let's call it something that is beyond our creation, something that is behind creation, but not necessarily God. Not necessarily God. Why not necessarily God? Because that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the prophets and the messengers. Alastu bi rabbikum? And then certainly, how do we get the responses to this answer? How do we know what we're supposed to be doing? You are not capable of somehow detecting God or detecting Allah Almighty based on your own mental or your own mind or your own intelligence, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not something that you can detect with your own intelligence. Why not? Because your own intelligence is designed to experiment things that are materialistic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not materialistic. So are you going to be able to detect God on some kind of scan or some kind of a philosophical, I guess, a study or a philosophical thought? The answer is no, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not within the area of what your mind can necessarily just figure out on its own, or your own experiment or your own intelligence can somehow detect. So what can our mind detect? Your mind can only detect the complexity of things, can only detect that things cannot be created on its own, that there is some creator behind this universe, that there is something far more complex than what we see in this universe. That's what your brain is capable of detecting. So then, because you're not capable of getting to the information about Allah Almighty, so yes, you were capable with research, with science, with, I don't know, whatever type of science you were studying. And then you came to the conclusion that this world is so complex, so intricate in its details, all of these different things. But then are you necessarily going to be capable of knowing information about Allah, like His names, like descriptions of Allah, why we were created? No, you're not going to be able to get there. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the prophets and messengers, because the information that relates to your reason for existence, that information had been there, and it was there before the existence of the design itself. What designed the design of universe? The idea that preceded the existence of the universe is basically outside of the universe. Meaning what? It is not something that somehow you're going to get, I don't know, in some kind of a hidden cell in some ocean that's going to say, okay, well, here's the information to why you were created and where you're heading and Judgment Day and all of these different things. You're not going to find that. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the prophets and the messengers to let you know of this information that, one, either preceded your existence or that will be far after your existence, meaning on Judgment Day. So it's either that information that preceded your existence or information that goes far beyond human or even world or even life existence. And that information is outside of your capacity to detect or outside of your capacity to figure out. Why is it outside of your capacity? Because your capacity is limited in time, and limited in space, and limited in the matter that it studies. your mind is very limited in how far it can go in terms of studying time, or whether we're talking about past time, or whether we're speaking about future time, or whether we're speaking about place, or whether we're speaking about matter. You can study matter, but things that are metaphysical, that's not something that your brain or even your ability to research is going to be capable of detecting or even studying. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond matter, is beyond nature, is beyond your capacity in researching, in knowing anything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let us know that there's a wiring within you to recognize as that receptor about Allah, to recognize that you were created for a reason, to recognize that you're supposed to be searching for that reason. Yet, of course, they will say, أَن تَقُولُوا إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. What is the reason that made such receptors basically, let's call it malfunction? Why did it malfunction? It malfunctioned because they were in a state of ghafla. What is the state of ghafla? A state of ghafla is basically the state when a person is pacified with something else. So what does that look like? Let's say you've got your child, he's basically playing games, but he had a test tomorrow. But he was so pacified with playing the games that he didn't recognize that he was supposed to be focusing on the test, and he didn't even care. He was so pacified with the game that he didn't even care to take a serious consideration for a test that he will be taking tomorrow. So the second day happens, and then, okay, well, these questions that are basically presented to him to answer, but then he couldn't answer them. Why? Because he was in a state of being pacified playing those games. In other words, his place of focus, his direction of focus and recognition was already busy with something else. That's ghafla. And that's the same thing when we're talking about ghafla, that our busy of focus was probably maybe too busy hanging out, too busy maybe going to parties, going to work, going to perhaps watching movies or whatever it is. They've been so pacified in this system that they were not even taking the time to recognize that life is short, that they will be held accountable, that this is a serious matter that they were created for and that they have to take seriously. That's al-ghafla. And that's why they basically wanted to lay out and say, well, it's not our fault, that is. They wanted to say, well, it was basically our forefathers. In other words, they wanted to blame a different generation and say, well, they paved the way to where we're at right now. They should be the ones to be held accountable and not us. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that that's not an excuse, because every single generation is going to be held accountable, not based on what their predecessors or those that basically had come before them and what choices that they had made, because at the end Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us the details of al-ayat, which is pretty much what you would see right there, يَقُصُّونَ عَلَيْكُمْ آيَاتِ. That's the same idea. So right there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that إِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُمْ رُسُلٌ مِّنكُمْ, and certainly the same thing that we would see within this ayah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there are prophets and messengers that are going to be sent, or at least were sent. Okay, and those were basically coming with a mission to give you the information that lets you know about لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, to let you know that perhaps, to bring it to your attention, to inform you about the purpose of your existence, and that your existence is not something that we just live and die and we just engage in this dunya. Okay, so of course, right there with the same idea, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And that's to let us know, of course, that there is a condition, and part of that revelation is that whoever is committed to taqwa. Now, I want you to look at the word taqwa. فَمَنِ اتَّقَى. What is taqwa? We had mentioned before, taqwa basically means to put some kind of a shield from any harm that's coming at you. That's the that's the initial meaning for taqwa. If, for example, somebody is trying to, I guess, throw something at you, the first thing that you're going to do, just even without you realizing, all right, just automatically you'll see your hand basically coming in order to protect you and to push whatever that was thrown at you automatically without even thinking about it. Why? Because you are wired that your face, your head, and this area is basically the most dangerous, the most sensitive area in your body. So you would recognize that you'd rather have your arm get hit and your arm basically to be the shield to protect you than your head getting hurt. So you automatically just put out your hand in order to protect you and to give you that shield. That's it, taqwa. Taqwa is the shield that you would put in order to protect you from an incoming threat. Okay. Now, when you say to protect you, what is this protecting us from? This is exactly, something that you can relate to with the word fasaqa. And we said the root fasaqa, and when you look at the initial meaning for the word, fasaqa actually means to take the peel off a fruit. That's what it means. So we're taking the peel off the fruit, and if the peel is off the fruit, that's going to expedite its decay. It will decay faster. And once it decays faster, it basically rottens and basically ends its life faster. So when you look at the root fasaqa and ittaqa, you're looking at taqwa being the peel to protect, and you're looking at fasaqa is basically that peel also in order to make sure that the person is not getting into that decay process. So when you say a person that is fasiq, well, what would be the meaning, the inference if a person is fasiq? What would that mean? That would mean as if they had taken off the shield that was protecting them, that is Sharia, that was protecting them from decaying. And once they take it off, they basically become exposed to the different contaminants that may be surrounding them. Whether we're speaking about a contaminant that may affect their heart, or may affect their aql, or their vision, or may affect their behavior, or may affect their body, and the list goes on and on. So therefore, when you look at فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ, those are two connected things, and certainly meaning that if you're embracing those ayat, you're embracing basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed. That is what is going to give you that protection. That's what's going to give you that protection. That's what's going to give you that empowerment. That's what's going to give you the shield. That's it, taqwa. The shield to protect you from the contaminants that may be either behavioral, or maybe coming from shayateen, or maybe coming from the society, and the list goes on and on. So therefore, it's not enough to just put on the shield, but you have to be consistent to making sure that you are in a state of as-sulaha, to actually mean that you, number one, when you look at this alif right there, okay, this alif as-salaha, it can mean that the person entered into salah. What is salah? The root is saluha. Saluha actually means to be in direction to something, or to be in a good state, or to be fit for something. Okay, so when you see that alif right there, when we say asbaha, that means they entered in sabah, which is morning. If we say amsa, that actually means they entered in the time span, or the time of night. Okay, so if we are to see that alif right there, this can mean to enter something, and this can mean that the person is within a state, in other words, a commitment to something. Okay, so just keep that one in mind. So is this necessarily saying this person, after embracing taqwa, that they entered a state of salah? But it doesn't mean the same thing. I mean, if you're in a state of salah, that means you're in a state of taqwa, right? Well, yes and no, they're quite different. Remember when we talked about a scholar named Ibn al-Faris yesterday, and we said that he had written a book called Fiqh al-Lugha? And we said in Fiqh al-Lugha, he basically goes in details about the differences between the meanings. That's exactly the same thing. Taqwa is slightly different than salah. What's the difference? Taqwa is taking a further step than the principles themselves. So, for example, you might say, well, it's halal for me to eat chocolate chip cookies. Okay, I know I'm always bringing this example up. That's my kid's favorite cookie. Okay, and but then you decide that I'm gonna give up on eating sugar, for example, because I could see that it's affecting my weight. I could see that it's affecting my ability to do qiyam al-layl, to wake up and I actually read Quran, etc., all these different things. So what do? You don't necessarily call it haram, but then you practice somewhat of a practice of zuhd. You practice a practice of trying to grow and upgrade in your deen by giving up on some of the things that are in dunya. So what do? You basically practice taqwa. What is taqwa in this situation? The taqwa is that you're trying to upgrade your deen by giving up on some of the things that may be distracting you or may be, let's say, causing a weight in making you making you disabled from being able to do what you would want to do as a level that you would like to upgrade to, which is the level of iman. Okay. Is salah is one, it's to do one good thing after another. We're talking about a series of good things. Okay. A series of good things. So what does that look like? That would mean with your husband, you're trying to be the best wife ever. With your children, you're trying to work out a plan, a program to get them into probably memorizing Quran or probably get them into their piety or etc. And with your perhaps with your in-laws, you've got another program. You're trying to, as much as you can, trying to control your anger and trying to control your temper, etc., to make sure that you're basically living up to the standard of a person that is salih. Okay, so what do? You practice one salih after another. So a person that is salih, they're salih on many corners, not just one. They're salih on many corners, not just one. All right. So when you say aslaha, that would mean that this person entered a state of purification on various ends. In their salah, this is what they're trying to do. In their memorization Quran, this is what they're trying to do. In their relationship with money, this is what they're trying to do. In their relationship with their social relations, this is what they're trying to do. So they're trying to perfect their relations on all ends. What are the relations that are considered as the most important key areas that a mu'min is supposed to be perfecting? Number one is deen. Number two is health. Number three is basically mental health and your own education, trying to educate yourself about Islam, trying to put your kids' education basically connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number four is basically chastity and family. You're working on your hijab, you're working on lowering your gaze, you're working on keeping distance from men, etc. Here we go. Good job. And number five is basically wealth. You're trying to do your share in zakat, trying to do your share in making sure you're not overspending and engaging in israf and trying to do a good job in money management, looking at the amount that's coming in, the amount that's coming out, allocating the right money and how it needs to be basically allocated based on that money management in taking consideration of what your income is and what you need to be spending it on in order to make sure that you live a balanced life. That balanced life, that's a salah. That balanced life, that's a salah. So whenever we speak of a person that is salih, we're speaking about a person that is living a life of balance. A life of balance on all ends, which is what we just discussed, the DNAIM, the deen, the nafs, the aql, the ird, the mal. the deen, basically what we just said. Maybe I should write that down. This is my little thing, but it's not actually coming from me. Okay, the DNAIM is not whatsoever coming from me, but this is what the scholars of usul al-fiqh and the scholars of fiqh would always consider as this is what Sharia is based off of. In other words, we're based off of. In other words, think of as the vertebra. Think of the your own spine. Okay, so this spine is what puts all these different pieces together. And of course, the brain, and we've got the spinal cord that basically helps you understand how you're controlling all the system in the rest of your body. So when you look at that system and that spinal cord, that's going to be D to stand for deen, N to stand for nafs, A to stand for aql, I to stand for ird, M to stand for mal. Okay, so DNAIM. Deen, religion, N, life and nafs, A, aql, mind and education, I, basically ird, chastity, family, and M stands for mal. Okay, now we say, if we were to say فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ, that salah involves all those corners especially, but in order to basically know what we're supposed to be doing, that's why we need to go back to basically what the Prophet had taught in the open book and the closed book, or the in also the book that the Prophet ﷺ, whether we're speaking about the Quran or whether we're speaking about the book, and how the Prophet ﷺ basically demonstrated what it means to practice al-wahi, which is a sunnah. So we're looking at two references, Quran and Sunnah. Okay, now let's continue right there after we basically just connected these two ayat together. And the reason, I wanted to show you this one as well is, keep in mind that this ayah is 172 in Surah Al-Araf. Why am I bringing this one up? We are in ayah 35 in Surah Al-Araf. Okay, now every single surah, think of it as you're making a braid. Okay, every single surah, you will see not only is it coherent with other ayat within that surah, but it would be coherent with other ayat outside of that surah. But I want you to see that, within one surah, that it would connect different areas and connect different ideas in order to create a vision that you're capable of understanding the world around you. You're creating a vision, you're creating understanding, you're basically putting in a foundation in how you relate with the world around you, how you relate with the ayat, how you relate with your purpose. Okay, so that's basically that in a nutshell. But another thing that I wanted to do, I thought it would be good, before I get into detailed tafsir, I thought it would be good to do somewhat of a surface tafsir right there. Okay, let's start with here. والذين كذبوا بآياتنا واستكبروا عنها أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. Okay, so wait a minute. How did we get that from, from saying فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, which is right there. Well, that is basically letting us know that this is mainly on Judgment Day. فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, mainly on Judgment Day. But does that not include this dunya as well? Yes, some scholars did actually say it does include this dunya as well, and is not necessarily exclusive to the akhirah. How would it be not necessarily including, or sorry, how would it be that some scholars actually said that doesn't include the dunya? And how is it that, we see people that are very religious or probably very pious, but they would still feel fear, or they would still feel sorrow. The biggest example is Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. Didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ? There you go, right there, that he was in a state of huzn, and his huzn, or his sorrow, or his trauma, it went so far that it actually affected his body, and he became blind as a result. So now we see an ayah right there letting us know that, yes, it wasn't just any matter that we can just say that, yes, even though he was practicing, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانِ. He was practicing all that patience, but his body couldn't handle it. And here we go. He just got blind right there. So, in other words, how do you explain this along with this? Here it is. He became hazin. Okay. A number of different things. Number one, there is natural or fitri, natural and fitri, meaning that there is this natural part of fear and sorrow. Just like the Prophet ﷺ, he was saddened over the death of his own son. And he said, Inna ya Ibrahim, inna al-ayna tadma wa inna al-qalba la yahzan. He said, our hearts are in sadness, in sorrow. Even though the Prophet ﷺ knew very well that he was going to Jannah, that the Prophet ﷺ was going to meet him in Jannah, but he was still really sad to have him depart life and to have him die. He was still sad. Now, there are different levels of huzn. So the huzn, or the sadness, or the fear, or those emotions, they're basically natural emotions. Some of it is natural emotions, just like when we're speaking about Prophet Musa alayhi salam. He was also going through fear. That, of course, fear is actually probably the most prophet that you could see fear present in his life as Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Fear was always present, whether with his mother, whether with him as a child, or whether when he even grew older as a youth, as a young man, and later, and etc. But that, how do we explain all of that, even though he was many times, he would be خائفا يترقب, he would be afraid and just looking out, is somebody watching me? And of course, he flees to another city. So definitely fear was there. How do we understand all of this? We understand these emotions, that part of it is natural. Part of it is part of your own natural creation. When Prophet Musa alayhi salam was afraid that they might get caught, he might get killed, etc., that was part of the human nature. Okay, that's part of human nature. This human nature to be afraid if, I don't know, something falls over your head or you hear the sound of thunder, that doesn't make you lack iman. To be sad because you lost a loved one, that doesn't mean that you lack iman. Because you cried, because you probably fainted, or because you probably were so sad, or probably because your body maybe developed a heart attack, or maybe high blood pressure, or maybe diabetes, or whatever it is. That's not something that you will be held accountable for. That's your body reacting to the different traumas that surround you. That's the same thing with Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. His body reacted to the trauma. He won't be held accountable. So how do we avoid these traumas from, let's say, taking a grip on us or affecting us that far? And that's where, of course, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانِ, then we would practice different methods to help us cope with this trauma, or cope with this situation, whatever the situation was, maybe poverty, maybe loss of a loved one, maybe just different pains, maybe, hey, a disease, an illness. How do we use religion, and how does religion help us cope with all of that? In practicing the behavior that we would react. Instead of reacting in a tantrum, we would react in a behavior that is hopeful in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, the most important thing that we would engage in is basically a behavior that is serene, a behavior that is hopeful in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a behavior that depends on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when the resources are lacking. Even when the resources are lacking, we just have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom, that whatever decisions, whatever perhaps maybe path or trajectory this goes into, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing it for a wise reason, for a good cause, because I would be hopeful. So that's why a mu'min is not living the fear, because they're hopeful in Allah. They would be not living the fear because they would have the hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would have their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, their strength is not in the way they would evaluate perhaps the resources or evaluate perhaps the different data that surrounds them, because the data is looking that doesn't look very promising. The data doesn't look promising, but you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so your khawf would be tamed. Your khawf would be tamed because you know that you are heading towards basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that relates to the description of التوكل, حسن التوكل على الله. You depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, subhanallah, my sister, the doctors, the oncologists, they come in. Mind you, she's in Mayo Clinic. Oncologists come in and they tell her, you have 12 days to live. She said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Alhamdulillah. And they said, well, although you only have 12 days to live, but we can use an option of probably a small dose of chemotherapy. Perhaps maybe it'll give you maybe a short span that might help you live a little bit longer. I was really surprised that she asked this question. She said, will it affect pregnancy? I was really confused. The doctors are telling you that you only have 12 days to live, but then she's asking about pregnancy. For a second, I was confused. Why would you ask about pregnancy when those doctors are telling you only have 12 days to live? And I asked her that question. She said, because I recognize that at the end of the day, they can have their say. And I recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has his say, that at the end, I depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I would like just to know this information. And at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we're supposed to do tawakkul, and I don't necessarily believe that everything that they say is right. Even though, the story, when we continued the story of I guess her treatment, the doctors were actually on the spot. 12 days, she only had lived after that day for 10 days only. And even later they came and they said, you only have 5 days to live. And certainly she only lived 4 days. And subhanAllah. But, at the end is that, how do we see in the note of all of this? How does a mu'min see all of this? A mu'min, la khawfun alayhim, because their hope is in Allah. Their hope is in Allah, and they connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the fear is tamed because their trust is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their trust is not dependent on the data that probably is presented to them. Not the data. Same thing with al-huzn. They would recognize that with this huzn right there, indeed, maybe a loss of a loved one, or maybe poverty, or lost a job, or whatever it is, they would recognize that al-Razzaq is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they would recognize, although, yes, I'm really sad that I lost my job. I'm not really sure what is going to come up in the future, but I recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Razzaq. So I would have my hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I don't fall in this deep huzn where I end up probably maybe becoming suicidal, or maybe in some kind of severe depression, because I would have my hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. They would not fear the future, because they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will only bring what is good for them. They will only recognize that the future is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their trust is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rizq is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Treatment is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Provision, perhaps maybe anything that is controlling the future, they would basically not live in this type of depression, not live in this type of fear, because they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that's controlling time, that's controlling potentials, that's controlling all the different provisions, that's controlling how things unfold. Therefore, they don't live this kind of deep fear that you would see a disbeliever probably living in. الحزن. الحزن is usually of past, of trauma, of past. Who knows? Early childhood, maybe later on, perhaps things that probably affected the person's life in different ways. So in that situation, of course, that develops into a certain type of huzn, a certain type of anguish, a certain type of sorrow, a certain type of sadness, etc. All of that, or depression or whatever it is, that would be huzn. But if that is the case, why did Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ, that huzn that he had developed is basically that natural cause. We can control our behavior. We can control how we relate to the sorrow, but it may happen that the sorrow is too big, that it may affect our relationship with our own body. So our own body may relate to sorrow, may relate to perhaps a trauma differently that may not be within our control. But we would recognize deep on the inside with our qalb, we would recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that will either compensate us, and because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adl, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all just. So we would recognize that even if it's a trauma, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be the one to give me compensation, to give me the support, to give me perhaps the ending in where it will do what is jabr. What is it, jabr? When we make the dua, Allahumma jbur kasrana, Ya Allah, mend our broken areas. You're probably broken. Maybe somebody said a word that hurt you, or maybe an event or something that hurt you in certain ways. You feel broken, you feel shattered. So you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to basically mend those broken areas within you. So you hold on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that part of what would bring in, one, it would take away the strongest level of fear or the strongest level of huzn, and that is basically by having taqwa and salah. That's basically by living the taqwa and by living salah. Subhanallah, when I remember, and sorry, remember my sister just died 15 days ago, so I'm still living, Allah yarhamha ya Rabbi, living that moment. I remember when the doctors, the oncologists, they came in and they said, you only have 5 days to live. She took a moment of silence and just looked at me and looked at the doctors. And then she said, can you interpret what they said? She doubted her English, her English understanding and her English proficiency. And she said, can you translate what they just said? I said, did you want me to translate it, word by word, or did you want me to give you the inference for it? She said, no, I want you. She's very particular. She said, I want you to exactly translate what they just said in Arabic. I said, they said that they anticipate looking at the information of what your blood tests are showing. You only have 5 days, and then that would be your ending. Took a moment of pause, looked at me, looked at the doctors, gave, I remember this gaze, the corner of her eye, stayed quiet for a bit, took a deep breath, and then she said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. To be honest, this is a demonstration of فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. You would think that a person, when they would hear you only have 5 days to live, that they would collapse, they would scream, they would engage in any of those, I guess, behaviors. But she said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And subhanAllah, that moment. And then she said, my brother just brought in some pastries before that. And then she said, okay, give some pastries to the doctor. She asked me to give pastries to the doctor. I said, sure. And then she started smiling and she said, Alhamdulillah that we're going to be dying on Islam. Give him some pastries. Thank him for all the effort. Thank you, doctor. The doctor couldn't hold his tears and he started crying. He couldn't hold his tears. We started comforting the doctors. We started comforting the doctor and started giving him the napkins. That Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, it's all in God's hands. This is فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. And when you see that, you live it. You know what? To be honest, these types of stories, these types of the way that she reacted, I would only read such reactions to such information or such news that you will be dying. I would only read it in books like Hilyat al-Awliya, Sifat al-Safwa, those types of books only. I wouldn't see these types of reactions to such information, but in those types of salihin that are at a very high level of iman. A high level of iman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Rabbi, accept her from the salihin and accept her amongst those that فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Allahumma ameen. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us take those salihin as our example and be capable of living that demonstration and that commitment. فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. All right, let's continue with this one. وَالَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا عَنْهَا أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. Of course, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to give a surface translation to the coming ayat. Why am I going to give that surface translation? Because we're going to compare, number one, what our surface translation would look like, and at the same time then going deeper and deeper into the words when we get to Tafseer al-Qurtubi. That's number two. And then certainly to give us an idea of how coherent and how connected these ayat are, and certainly to help us understand the relationship between ayah number one, ayah number two. So in ayah number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know, Ya Bani Adam, we're speaking to the children of Adam, of course, speaking to the children of Adam, you had the opportunity of prophets coming to you, bringing in the information, bringing in basically all the different prescriptions that were necessary for you to get to what? Ittaqa wa aslaha. To get to the level of that you would be protecting yourself from hellfire, you would be living the level of piety, the level of commitment, the level of religious integrity, then that's in order to help you not find al-khawf or al-huzn, not find basically sorrow or fear on Judgment Day or even in this dunya. Yet on the other hand, وَالَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا عَنْهَا أُولَئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. Yet in contrast to these people that would be living ittaqa wa aslaha, in contrast to these people that would be living in taqwa, and those that would be living in piety, in contrast to them would be a person that lived two things. Number one is that they lived in denial, unlike those that had basically embraced what the prophets had come with. They would be living in denial. They would be living in complete separation from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent in basically the verses. Well, that is in their vision. In their vision, they would live that denial. Yet in their behavior, وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا عَنْهَا. In their behavior, they would be arrogant. They would basically consider themselves as superior and would certainly reject what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent. And they would regard themselves that they don't need this information and somehow that they are superior and certainly would consider themselves as the center. أُولَئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. Those are, the word is ashab. Is-sahib is the companion to something. So when it says أُولَئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ, in other words, they had determined by making those choices to separate themselves from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered them to do, they would then put themselves in that position to be the ones that would accompany hellfire. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. هم فيها خالدون. They would be the ones that would be living there eternally. Eternally meaning what? Is this لابثين فيها أحقابا? As in the ayah that says لابثين فيها أحقابا, does that mean 80 years plus 80 years plus 80 years because it says أحقابا? Or is this talking about a certain time? Is this خالدون meaning eternally, that there's no end of time? In other words, we're speaking about infinity. Or is there a point when hellfire would just become basically as something that would eat up itself and ending? We're going to talk about that later on. Okay. فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا. Now, as a result, then the ayah says, well, certainly, why would they be living this punishment? That's the question. Why did they deserve this punishment? Why did they deserve the punishment of hellfire, or even to be there, let alone, of course, to be there eternally? Infinity. Why did they deserve the punishment? So the ayah then would take us to explaining the reason. فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنِ افْتَرَى عَلَى اللَّهِ كَذِبًا. So this isn't an interrogative clause, but this is an explanatory and a parenthetical clause, letting us know that there is no transgression worse than those that would create blasphemy and make some kind of a lie and attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or أو كذب بآياته. Two things that we would see here. Hold on. So number one is that افترى على الله كذبا. They made up some kind of a misinformation. They created some kind of a misinformation. In other words, they formed some kind of a lie and attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is that in regards to Allah himself, or is this in regards to anything that relates to the unseen? Whether we're speaking about life and what the meaning of life is, or the meaning of akhirah, or probably our relationship with Allah, or who is Allah, etc. That's iftara ala Allahi kadiban. Any information about Allah himself, or any information about why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe, is actually putting in words or putting in and creating a narrative and basically claiming it to be going back and tracing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first portion of it. The second portion is كذب بآياته. كذب بآياته basically means denied his ayat. What is an ayah? An ayah can mean a sign. An ayah can mean a revelation. An ayah can mean a miracle. An ayah could also mean a verse. Okay, so when you look at كذب بآياته, and it didn't say كذب بآياته, but it said كذب. And I want to look at this shadda. The shadda itself can actually have multiple meanings. One, it can mean something happening gradually. It can mean something happening in repetition. It can mean as a type of hyperbole, and it can also mean something that is consistent. Okay, consistent or repetitive behavior. So when you look at it, can say أو كذب بآياته, but this is كذب بآياته, meaning that this person was one, taking a certain series of gradually denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they were consistent in denying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they were repeating basically that into a behavior. So it wasn't just a word that they were demonstrating it in basically denial, but it was a behavior as well, that they took a different path. They took a different path in their behavior and what they would do. So that's كذب بآياته. كذب بآياته, that they denied the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are the verses that this is talking about? Whether this is talking about, one, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent prophets, or whether two, what information was sent within them about Allah, or three, this is talking about legislation. What is the definition of justice? What defines right, wrong, what defines principle, what defines the different details and corners of life. That's basically all in ayat Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أولئك ينالهم نصيبهم من الكتاب. Those are the ones that will, the word is ينالهم. What is ينال? ينال, the root is نالا. Nala means when you basically catch something, when you get a hold of something, and nala, when you may acquire something. Okay, but yanaluhum, that is to let us know that when the person questioned, well, why did they deserve this level and this extreme level of punishment, where it is not only extreme in its kind, but even in the timing of it, basically is so severe. Why did they deserve this severity? So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أُولَٰئِكَ يَنَالُهُمْ نَصِيبٌ مِّنَ الْكِتَابِ. That is basically a result of what they had invested. They were the ones that invested that when they were already told, they were already foretold about all of this, but they invested in this type of that nasib. What is a nasib? When we say nasib, nasib can be a portion of something. Nasib could also be a reward to something. Nasib could also be something that is probably a luck of something. But when you say أولئك ينالهم نصيب من الكتاب, it could also mean it is part of what was actually mentioned. So this is a part of it and not the entirety of the whole punishment. This is just a part. So in other words, نسأل الله العفو والعافية, أولئك ينالهم, that it will basically come to them. It will basically be something that will prick them. And this is just the portion of what was as a response to what they had committed. That's number one. Or this is a portion of that response of what they will be basically punished with. من الكتاب. What kitab? Is this kitab in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically foretold about in the Quran, what will be the punishment for the disbelievers? Or is this kitab to basically mean al-kitab, meaning al-lawh al-mahfuz? Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already listed in al-lawh al-mahfuz, and we're going to get to lawh al-mahfuz later on. But basically the book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had written the information before our existence. We're going to get to lawh al-mahfuz, and we're going to get a whole article basically on al-lawh al-mahfuz to understand what it is later on. Okay? حتى إذا جاءتهم رسلنا يتوفونهم, until our messengers, they would bring them to death. Wait. the messengers, like the prophets? No. These rusuluna, this is basically the angels. When the angels would basically come and bring them to death, يتوفونهم قالوا أينما كنتم تدعون من دون الله أينما كنتم تدعون من دون الله. Where is whatever you used to? The word is تدعون. The word تدعون من دون الله can mean تعبدون من دون الله, that whatever you were worshiping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whatever you were invoking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where is it? Whatever you were worshiping, or whatever you were invoking, or whatever you were embracing as other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to being whether the creator or to being as the center that would basically be the claim that you had claimed that this life evolves around. قالوا ضلوا عنا. They responded. They said, ضلوا عنا. What is ضلوا عنا? They went away, or did they go away? What happened? Who's the first and who's the last? ضلوا عنا, meaning that these things basically were mistakes that we had basically committed in. It was nothing but a delusion that we embraced. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. ضلوا عنا. They either denied them, those things, let's say they considered, I don't know, some kind of a figure that was their center. And certainly those figures, they basically said, we have nothing to do with you. You embrace that. We didn't tell you to practice it. Why? Because now they want to separate themselves from committing any mistake, and the best way to do it is basically to deny guilt. It's to deny accountability, is to deny responsibility. All right. So they said, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَشَهِدُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَنَّهُمْ كَانُوا كَافِرِينَ. Now they basically became the ones to witness upon themselves. In other words, now they confessed on their own that they were nothing but disbelievers. Wait, what is the root kafara? The root kafara can mean to deny something, and could also mean al-juhud. What is al-juhud? Al-juhud basically means well, I mean, it is to deny, but al-juhud could also mean another level of denial, where you're completely against something. When you're completely against something. So wait a minute. So is the word kafir, or it can also mean to hide. So that's why farmers would also be called kafirin. الكفار. يعجب الكفار نباته. Does that mean this is talking about the disbelievers, or is this talking about the farmers? This is talking about the farmers. All right. Why would the farmer be called a kafir? They would be called a kafir because they would hide the seed in the soil and then they would cover it up. That's basically right there, and wait for it to grow, water it and wait for it to grow. So are we kafir of Christianity, for example? Certainly we are. Yeah, we're kafir of Christianity. We're kafir of atheism. We're kafir of Judaism. We're kafir of what they believe in us. That's why كفرنا بكم وبدأ بيننا وبينكم العداوة والبغضاء. كفرنا بكم. We deny what you believe in, and you deny what you believe in. So in other words, they basically then would come across the realization that they were basically denying all the truth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent. قال ادخلوا في قد خلت من قبلكم من الجن والإنس في النار نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Then who's basically telling them that? Is that the malaika, or is this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving them the order? So two differences of opinions. قال ادخلوا, then is this Malik Khazin al-Nar basically telling them, now you're going to enter along with the many nations في قد خلت من قبلكم, along with the many nations that had lived before you, from al-jinn and from al-ins, from the humans and from the jinn. They would be entering النار. كلما دخلت أمة لعنت أختها. Every single time a nation would enter enter where? Enter in hellfire. They would curse the other nation, basically, that was similar to it. حتى إذا اداركوا فيها. In another قراءة تداركوا. In another قراءة that was quite interesting, that أدركوا, when they realize. So اداركوا, when they would be basically getting to that position and they enter hellfire, that's اداركوا. But تداركوا, when they would, or when they would realize that they are right now in an inevitable state in hellfire, that's when they would basically just realize that what is meant by all that was coming to them in Revelation. And then قالت أخراهم لأولاهم, the last one of course, those that would be entering hellfire, they would tell the first group that came before them, رَبَّنَا هَؤُلَاءِ أَضَلُّونَا. They would then say, "Oh Lord, they were the ones that had deluded us, so give them the torment, basically, of hellfire, multiple. In other words, add them and increase the level of torment upon them," because they wanted to say that they were the ones that were accountable. They were the ones that were responsible for the state of delusion that they were in. قال لكل ضعف ولكن لا تعلمون. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it Malik Khazin Nar? Two differences of opinions. What is Malik Khazin Nar? Malik is the name of the angel that is the guard of hellfire. That's Malik. He said, or is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لكل ضعف, for each there is a multiplied amount of torment and punishment. ولكن لا تعلمون. But you don't know what the other group is basically facing. You don't know what the other person, what the other group on that other side of hellfire, and what punishment they're going through and what punishment they're facing. You may not know it, but they're also getting their share, that is. وَقَالَتْ أُولَاهُمْ لِأُخْرَاهُمْ. The last one, the first group that came and of course now they're responding, because the first group, they basically said, you know what, why don't you multiply the punishment for the ones that came before us? They're the ones that deluded us. They wanted to hold them accountable. But then the first group that came into hellfire basically responded to the later group that came in. فَمَا كَانَ لَكُمْ عَلَيْنَا مِنْ فَضْلٍ فَذُوقُوا الْعَذَابَ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَكْسِبُونَ. And then they said, you know what? You're not any better. Why don't you get the same amount of torments that you had basically committed? And فَذُوقُوا الْعَذَابَ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَكْسِبُونَ. You also engaged in all of that. Then don't hold us accountable and don't hold us responsible, because you basically had ended up embracing that behavior. We shouldn't be held accountable. We shouldn't be responsible for whatever choices that you had made. And then, of course, the announcement, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. In other words, whether we're speaking about the earlier groups that entered hellfire, or whether we're speaking about the later groups that entered hellfire, at the end, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا, those that had denied the verses in the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those that had embraced arrogance. Now I want you to look at two things here. The same thing that we had mentioned earlier. كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, in the vision itself, in embracing the whole concept of what the Quran had come with, what the revelation had come with. And in behavior, they lived in arrogance. لا تفتح لهم أبواب السماء ولا يدخلون الجنة حتى يلج الجمل or الجمل, and we're going to get in, or الجمال في سم الخياط. Those that basically practice this arrogance. لا تفتح or تفتح or يفتح or يفتح لهم أبواب السماء ولا يدخلون الجنة حتى يلج الجمل في سم الخياط. I just basically laid out the different قراءات. Okay, so لا تفتح or لا تفتح لهم أبواب السماء. They will not get the doors of السماء open to them. Wait a minute, so are we talking about the door of the heavens, or are we talking about the door of Jannah? It's both, because al-Jannah is in السماء. They would not get one. If you're talking about tufattahu with a shadda, that would actually mean a door after a door, a door after a door. No door, despite the many doors of Jannah, they would not open up to them. And even أبواب السماء. So here's a question. If we're saying لا تفتح لهم أبواب السماء, are we talking about السماء itself? Just like in the ayah in Surah Al-Fajr. يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. We're talking about the ruh basically rising in the heavens, and the angels would be smelling the beautiful smell of that person's ruh, and then they would say, who is this person that's coming in? And then they would say, it's X Fulan ibn Fulan. This is who is right now coming into the skies. And then they would say, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna. Oh, the soul that was always living in tama'nina, in being in the state of tranquility. Irji'i ila rabbika radiyatan mardiyah. Go back to your Lord Almighty while you would be radiyah. You would be content. You would not live the fear. You would not live the sorrow. And therefore, you are in a state of radiyah. You are in a state of radi, you're in a state of being content. Mardiyah. You are in a state of being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content over you, and you are content over the status that you are in. فَدُخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي. Enter في عبادي. في عبادي with عبادي. Enter with my servants. وَدُخُلِي جَنَّتِي. And enter my Jannah. So now is this أبواب السماء that is referred to here? We're going to get to in details with that. وَلَا يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةِ. And they would not enter al-Jannah, that is the disbelievers, حتى يلج الجمل في سم الخياط. Until الجمل, is this talking about الجمل to mean like a camel? Or is this الجمل or الجمل? Is this the basically the rope that would be used for ships? In order, of course, they would throw in what is the anchor in order to basically stop the ship from moving forward. So they would drop the anchor basically in the sea. Is this what rope that is holding the anchor? Is this al-jamal, or is this literally al-jamal to mean basically a camel? في سم الخياط. What is سم الخياط? Is this talking about the little tiny hole in a needle? Is this ever going to happen that this rope, whether we're speaking about a rope of that holds the anchor, or whether we're speaking about a jamal, that camel, that they will not ever enter Jannah until the camel or the rope would penetrate in the small hole of a needle? Is that ever going to happen? وَكَذَلِكَ نَجْزِي الْمُجْرِمِينَ. And this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold, the word najzi will hold basically the mujrimin. Al-mujrimin are the criminals. Al-mujrimin are those that had transgressed the limit. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold them accountable. لَهُم مِّن جَهَنَّمَ مِهَادٌ وَمِن فَوْقِهِمْ غَوَاشٍ. For what they will be getting from Jahannam, they will be getting mihad. What is al-mihad? Al-mihad is basically the area of where a baby would be in. Al-mahd is what a baby would be in. It's like a cradle. Okay, so what they would be getting in Jahannam, a cradle? Is this what it's talking about? No, they won't be getting a cradle, but this is talking about as their own bedding, that what is underneath them is basically kind of like a cradle. It would be hellfire underneath their feet, and from the top of their head, they would basically get ghawash. Ghawash is basically a covering. What covering? In other words, it would be Jahannam from underneath and Jahannam from the top. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. وكذلك نجزي الظالمين. And this is how the ظالمين, the transgressors and the oppressors, would basically be accountable. And this is how they would be punished. As for وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, in contrast to what the ظالمين or what the مجرمين or what the الذين استكبروا or those that are كذبوا, in contrast to what they would be getting, there's the other group. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يجعلنا منهم اللهم آمين. والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها. And for those that had basically believed and done what is righteous. Now the word as-salihat, you got the alif lam right there, which basically would let us know exactly like when we said aslaha, we would look at they had done as-salihat. This is inclusive al. All the different inclusive all the different types of piety. And it could also be al-ahdiyya, meaning what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had specified as what defines a righteous behavior. لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها. No soul would be accountable or would be asked to be committed to something unless it is within their capacity. أولئك أصحاب الجنة. Those are the people that would be ashab, the companions of al-Jannah, hum fiha khalidun. They would be living there eternally. Just like, of course, the people of hellfire would be staying there eternally. Well, so will the people of Ahl al-Jannah. وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّن غِلٍّ. What is naza'na? Naza'a actually means to uproot something. Uprooting what? نزعنا ما في صدورهم من غل. Why didn't it say نزعنا ما في قلوبهم من غل? Why نزعنا ما في صدورهم? First of all, what does it mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uprooted all the different animosity that is in their chests. Why? What animosity? Animosity towards who? So there are different stations before getting to Judgment Day, or before getting to Jannah, sorry, not Judgment Day. In Judgment Day, there are different stations. There's a station where you will be just basically just standing. That's why it's called Yawm al-Qiyamah. There's another station where you would be getting your books and your hands are stretched out, and those books would be flying from up above you. And then the book would either fall in the right hand or in your left hand. There's a station where you would be crossing a bridge going to basically Jannah, but if the person falls off the bridge, they would be falling in hellfire. There's another station where it would be al-Hawd. There's another station where they would basically get in water from that spring of al-Hawd al-Kawthar, basically the spring that's coming from Jannah, and they would basically be drinking from it. There's a station where there's that intercession where the Prophet ﷺ would basically intercede. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those. And there's another station when they would cross the bridge, but that doesn't mean that they get to Jannah yet. Even if you cross the bridge, it doesn't mean that you get to Jannah yet. They'll be standing right at the door of Jannah, not yet going into Jannah. Yes, Sister A and Sister B, they cross that bridge, but Sister A doesn't like Sister B. They can't yet enter Jannah. We need to make sure that when they enter Jannah, that they are entering prepared for the eternity of happiness. And part of that happiness is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would cleanse any type of hatred, any type of animosity, any type of anger, any type of animosity against one another. And that's to let us know that a person can be salih and another sister can be salihah. Okay, a sister can be salihah and another sister can be salihah. And they might have, I guess, they just don't click together. They don't just blend. They might have some animosity. They're both good women, but they just don't click. They probably don't like each other's attitudes. They just don't blend very well. But that doesn't mean that sister A or sister B is necessarily bad. It just means they just don't click very well. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّن غِلٍّ. Why not قُلُوبِهِم? Because a mu'min deep on the inside of al-qalb. Al-qalb is deeper inside sadr. Sadr is wider. Sadr is, think of it as the chest. Al-qalb is the core of that chest. But a mu'min does not know this type of animosity that enters their heart because they recognize deep on the inside in their qalb, they recognize that they needed to do a lot of tazkiyah. They needed to do a lot of tazkiyah, and part of that tazkiyah is that they would remove this type of hatred against their believing sister or against their believing brother. They would remove it. So what is still in their hearts? That's in sadr, it's a little farther outside. And there's some animosity, some hate, probably some anger to one another. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised that all of that will be eliminated. Naza'na. It will be uprooted. It will be eliminated from their chests. And what will they enter in? جنة نزعنا ما في صدورهم من غل تجري من تحتها الأنهار من تحتهم الأنهار. That, of course, what they will be granted is basically the heavens, and right underneath it, there will be flowing rivers. These flowing rivers, how do they relate to all of that? وقالوا الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا. They would relate to it. Alhamdulillah, all the praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that guided us to basically getting this reward. وَمَا كُنَّا لِنَهْتَدِيَ لَوْلَا أَنْ هَدَانَ اللَّهُ. We would not have been capable of finding this, basically the path to this, if it wasn't by the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَقَدْ جَاءَتْ رُسُلُ رَبِّنَا بِالْحَقِّ. Verily, the prophets and the messengers of our Lord Almighty had come with truth. وَنُودُوا, and they would be called out on أَن تِلْكُمُ الْجَنَّةُ أُورِثْتُمُوهَا بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. This is the Jannah that you will be inheriting for what you had presented in action, what you had presented in belief, what you had presented in. When you say تعملون, there's العمل القلب, there's عمل الجوارح, and there's عمل اللسان as well. Watch and look at this one. When you look at ta'malun, it's not just what you do in terms of action. All right? That's a very surface interpretation of amal. Amal can include what your tongue would speak. That's amal al-lisan. That's the action of your tongue. There's the amal al-qalb. That's why he said right there, نَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّن غِلٍّ. There's the amal of al-heart. Of the heart, the amal that a heart might do, whether to like something, to hate something. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ فِيكُمْ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ لَوْ يُطِيعُكُمْ فِي كَثِيرٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْرِ لَعَنِتُّمْ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ حَبَّبَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْإِيمَانَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made Iman basically lovable to you, lovable to your heart. زَيَّنَهُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ. It was beautified in your heart. وَكَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمْ. Now here's one piece of al-amal, is that you can't just engage in love, but you also have to engage in distancing yourself from certain behaviors. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala كَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفُسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانَ, made disbelief, made practicing any form of al-fisq, any form of transgression to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles, or even كَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفُسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانَ, or even individual sins. And كَرَّهَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكُفْرَ وَالْفُسُوقَ وَالْعِصْيَانَ أولئك هم الراشدون. Those are the ones that are mature. They went into another level of maturity in understanding their deen, in embracing what it means to do the righteous action. So, wanudu, they were called on. whether it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or whether it's Ridwan, basically the angels that are gatekeepers for Jannah, they would be called and said, تلكم الجنة أورثتموها. That's the Jannah that you will be inheriting for the actions that you had basically presented. ونادى أصحاب الجنة أصحاب النار. The people of أصحاب الجنة, the people that are living in Jannah, they basically, of course, if you say nada ashabu, then who's the caller? It's basically ashabul Jannah. They called on to the people of hellfire, ashab an-nar. أن قد وجدنا ما وعدنا ربنا حقا فهل وجدتم ما وعد ربكم حقا. We found what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised us as true, every single detail of it. Did you find what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised you as true? قالوا نعم. Or in another qira'ah, نعم. They said na'am or na'am. They said yes or they said na'am, and certainly and of course, or is it na'am, that meaning ashab al-jannah would say, what we found was nothing but blessing. Okay, and na'am to basically say, yes, we found that. فَأَذَّنَ مُؤَذِّنٌ بَيْنَهُمْ اللَّعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. Then one would call out. Is that necessarily an angel that was basically calling out? At the end, this is Yawm al-Adhan. This is the day where it was making an announcement. What is that announcement? La'natullahi ala al-zalimin. The curse of the Lord Almighty be upon those oppressors. Who are those oppressors? الَّذِينَ يَصُدُّونَ عَن سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Those that would turn people away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She's within a group, for example, and this sister is trying to invite the other sisters to pray or invite them to practice Islam or trying to invite them to practice hijab or etc. And the other women, they're basically, oh, come on, you look just fine like that. Oh, don't engage in that. That's so fanatic. That's so extreme. No, no, no. Don't practice that. She's just too much. You're fine the way you're doing it. That's yasudduna an sabilillah. They're basically trying to take that sister away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَبْغُونَهَا عِوَجًا. And what they're seeking is nothing but a crooked path. What do you mean crooked path? How does a crooked path even look like? A crooked path, any path that is away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically demonstrated as the path of piety, that's a crooked path. It's a path that's taking the person away from the path that will lead them to as-sirat al-mustaqim. As-sirat al-mustaqim actually means straight path. As-sirat al-mustaqim also means the bridge that is over hellfire, that if you were to cross it, you'll get to Jannah. As-sirat al-mustaqim is also the opposite of al-iwaj. Al-iwaj actually means crooked. So whether we're meaning metaphorically crooked or whether literally crooked, at the end of the day, if the person is living in a lifestyle away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had regarded as legislature, in legislature or in fiqh or in Sharia, then that person is living a lifestyle that does not suit, one, their fitra, does not suit their body, does not suit their ruh, does not suit their aql, does not suit their qalb. Then that person is basically living a life that is not compatible. So when you look at iwaj, that would mean incompatible basically with the aql, the qalb, the fitra, the ruh, the data that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created nature in, that would be incompatible. So iwaja can be incompatible, can mean crooked, could also mean that it is inconsistent with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent in terms of what He had sent in terms of al-ayat. All right? وَهُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ كَافِرُونَ. And they were deniers or they were in denial of al-akhirah. وَبَيْنَهُمَا حِجَابٌ. Now, I'm going to stop right here. Okay, we're going to stop right here, and because there's not enough time. So, and inshallah, we'll continue. Let's see, tomorrow is Saturday. So today is Thursday. Okay. So tomorrow is Friday. Okay. So وَبَيْنَهُمَا حِجَابٌ. We'll continue that tomorrow. And inshallah, what we're going to do, we're going to be this whole page or page and a half or page and a little bit more. We're going to be taking in basically Tafseer al-Qurtubi, and we're going to see the different qira'at that relate to these ayat. And we're going to basically look at Tafseer al-Qurtubi and what he needed to say about those ayat. You could see in Tafsir al-Qurtubi, he doesn't actually go in lots of details. It's pretty straightforward. So we will be, inshallah, finishing the whole page. You could see those highlights, all right? So we'll be pretty much going over those highlights, inshallah, tomorrow. It's going to be really easy, but we will be covering a couple figures tomorrow, inshallah. And I think the figures that I wanted to talk about tomorrow was going to be Ali ibn al-Madini, Abdul Rahman ibn Mahdi. We're going to talk about those. And we're also going to talk about the variant qira'at in a number of different words based on what al-Qurtubi wanted to basically note. So stay tuned for tomorrow. And plus, I forgot to mention, we will also be talking about al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. Inshallah, go into details about al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. A lot to say about al-Lawh al-Mahfuz. So hopefully we'll have enough time to cover that page. For the time being, inshallah, if there are any questions, I'd love to hear your questions, and hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to answer those questions. So if there are any questions, I'd love to hear them. Let's see. You, Mr. Habibti Amr. Let's see. Ruh and fitra, are they two different things? Yes, dear. Ruh and fitra are two different things. الروح قل الروح من أمر ويسألونك عن الروح قل الروح من أمر ربي وما أتيتم من العلم إلا قليلا. الروح is basically something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in us that makes life, that brings life. Once it departs our body, that basically means the death of this body. Okay, al-fitra is the programming. Think of it as part of the DNA that you basically find within you, that recognizes certain things about life, that recognizes certain things about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala programmed in you. But of course, al-ruh is different than al-fitra. Al-fitra is the programming. Al-ruh is the actual substance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created that makes us alive, basically. Let's see. The sister said we should not expose our iman to harm taqwa, a default position. I'm going to explain what you're saying to me.
So I know you were quite going in depth about taqwa, which I'll review. I wanted to understand, does part of taqwa includes like you don't expose your faith, like your belief to harm, like I don't know, like if you're in an area where no, you're in a group with a group of people and they're talking about I don't know, doubts. You shouldn't expose yourself to that. Or you shouldn't, sometimes as Muslim we have this confidence, like especially in the West, that we can handle certain situations, but actually it just impacts your iman. So I wanted to understand, like, is the default position when it comes to your taqwa and iman not to expose yourself to it, not to expose yourself
Okay,
to,
so in general, whether
yeah.
your piety or whether your sins, you are asked to conceal them and not expose it. So whether you're doing a good deed, I don't know, you're doing Qiyam al-Layl, you're memorizing Quran, good for you. Don't let others know about it, because in that situation you would be afraid that you might fall in riya. So don't tell people what you're doing in good things. And even when it comes to wrong things, don't expose your sins. Because the second that you expose your sins, one, you're inviting others to engage in it. Number two, that will later probably affect you, and it will affect you because you will become basically part of al-mujahireen, part of those that are mujahirun in their masiyah, part of those that would be announcing their sin. So whether in piety or whether in masiyah, Islam is basically asking us to learn how to conceal those things, whether in good or whether in bad. That's the recommendation. Did I answer that one?
Kind of, Ustad. What about when it comes to doubts? Like in dawah, like you're giving dawah to people. You're kind of putting your iman at front line because you're exposing yourself to skepticism or any
I
other
mean,
like
it doesn't mean
yeah.
like, or if we're going to give a halaqah, for example, right now we're going to
Oh,
give a halaqah. How am I going to
yeah.
give a halaqah without me being out there? It makes no sense,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
right?
Okay.
There's no way. But in general, but you don't know how committed
Mm,
I am. That's an ikhlas that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that sees, right?
mhm.
Ikhlas and how sincere I am in or you are in, that's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is capable of knowing whether this person is sincere, whether they're not sincere, right? So in that situation, in general, especially if we're talking about ibadat, you want to conceal as much as you can about your piety or about whatever you're doing to basically make it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that doesn't mean that you would get into into this paranoia. Like, for example, there's no way that I can give a class and actually do a tafsir class if I'm if I'm not out there, if I don't put it out there. There's absolutely no way. But you don't know my ikhlas. We just ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us al-ikhlas. We would always remind ourselves to always be considerate over ikhlas because your riya is going to be wiping away every single good deed that you had committed, every single good deed that you had invested. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ was telling us about the first four on Judgment Day, who will get hellfire blazing on them. He mentioned a scholar, he mentioned a person that made donation, a person that is a hafid, the person that is a mujahid. And they all had said that they and claimed that they were doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you were a liar. Yes, people did recognize you as a alim or as a hafid or as a mujahid or as a very generous donor, but you know very well that you were just seeking people. You were just seeking people to praise you or endorse you for such a matter. You weren't seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nasallahu alaihi wa sallam. But at the end, in general, be as private as you can in order to make sure that your ikhlas is in place. Let's see, the sister is also saying, that's your Amr too. A hopeful mindset is not just a mental reset or a positive thinking exercise. It is deeply tied to one's iman. Amr, explain yourself, dear.
You know, hopeful mindset, I think in psychology that we have, to be optimistic,
Right.
to but you as non-Muslims they have a hopeful mindset. So you know how
Absolutely.
you described um Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. I think this ties to my other question that that's there is that huzn, you said a deep fear. That type of huzn, it does affect you psychologically, physically, but it doesn't harm your iman. Am I correct in saying that? But it
It
actually
can
leads
harm
you
your
to Allah.
iman, dear. It
It
can
can.
harm. It can harm
Ah,
your iman negatively or positively. That's why إن الله إذا حب المؤمن ابتلاه. طب wait a minute. How is it إن الله إذا حب المؤمن ابتلاه? A mu'min, even when they get into an ibtila or they get into some kind of crisis or some kind of trauma or some kind of hardship, for a mu'min, they'll use this trauma or this sorrow or this sadness or whatever they're encountering. They'll use it to basically seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's say the person, I don't know, got laid off. All right. They got laid off, but then they reached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to make the dua to give them rizq. So what did they do? They seized the moment to head to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They recognize that rizq is not necessarily coming from this job, but rizq is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That people do not control rizq, but those people are a mean form, a mean part of rizq, but not necessarily the place of rizq. And this person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, might close the doors of possibly rizq, or close the doors of health, or close many doors on you in order to basically hear your dua call, Ya Rab, Ya Rab, and might close different doors in order to seek that you basically not be dependent on that, but depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even grow in your capacity. You make the dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would make you stronger. And what does he do? He probably takes away your parent, or probably takes away your job, or probably takes away certain things that you were dependent on. Why? Because he wanted you to develop new strengths. Wanted you to develop new strengths, whether it's a strength of Iman, or whether it's a strength of different areas of power in order for you to basically grow, different areas of power. And that's basically that positive thinking that you were talking about. So when we're talking about positive thinking, certainly al-mu'min basically practices during the time of ease, practices one, bringing in a vision that is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or practices behavior that is hopeful unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, practices a behavior that is consistent in connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That way, while they are dying, or that way when a calamity would happen, or that way when things go wrong in their life, or whatever it is, that they will be consistent. That's why فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ, they'll be consistent with the salah, with the piety that they had been growing. It's like an exercise. They had been growing and training themselves into that salah from that time. So what do? They stay committed to it. And that's the same thing, whether we're speaking about psychologically, or whether we're speaking about choices that we might be making. That what commitment that you will be living in is basically dependent on what you had invested previously, what you had invested in yourself. I do have mindfulness in Islam, a lecture on YouTube. Check it out. It does actually talk about mindfulness in Islam and how different or how similar and what ways Islam basically trains the believer to practice mindfulness, to practice that type of connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether it's in repetition, or whether it's in vision, or whether it's in a set of different things that you would have to say. Dhikr. What does dhikr mean? So is it to say something? Is it to repeat something? Is it to engage in something? There are certain things that you would have to practice to make sure that you are consistent with your principle of salah. You're consistent. You don't fill different gaps of salah, but you basically live in that consistency of piety throughout your life, in what you say, what you listen to, what you look at, where you walk to, what is deep on the inside, whether your mind, or whether in your heart, or whether in your ruh. That's a person. فَمَنِ اتَّقَى وَأَصْلَحَ فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ. Okay, now then you write Husn, deep sorrow. You know what, Amr, why don't you go ahead and read what you wrote, dear? It sounds very beautiful. Go ahead.
Oh, I wrote that huzun, deep sorrow can affect a person physically and psychologically without necessarily harming their iman, as seen in the example of Yaqub alayhi salam. His grief over Yusuf was immense, even affecting his eyesight, yet his trust in Allah remained firm. This suggests there is a type of sorrow rooted in love, loss, and human pain that does not weaken faith. This huzun leads you to Allah. But then, like, because we're talking about two types of huzun, so the other
Right,
huzun
right.
which was that, but there's another form of huzun tied to despair, hopelessness, spiritual heedlessness, or losing trust in Allah's wisdom and mercy. That kind of sorrow can begin to affect one's iman, not only psychologically or physically, but spiritually as well. So I thought, like, because I want to diagnose this one so I can apply it to my life, is this mainly like the losing hope, losing despair in Allah? Is this mainly due to the lack thereof, or not having a good opinion of Allah and His mercy? And and
Fair
then
enough. So
and then
we're a
yeah.
combination of multiple things. But here's one thing. Many times we may focus on one corner and forget that this corner is not the only thing that makes us. Let me break it down. What am I saying? So your vision in life and what you believe in, this is one segment of you. Your vision is going to affect what behavior, what decision making you make, and what you engage in life, because that is a reflection of what vision, aqidah, you carry. And then the behavior itself is not separate from what will be cooked within your heart. What will be cooked within your heart, what will be cooked within your ruh, all of that, think of it as, you would basically see that there's a foundation, just like you would have earth has multiple crusts, environment, basically they would have a number of different levels of course, and how we're talking about the atmosphere, for example. Atmosphere basically has different levels. Same thing with Iman. There's that level of Iman that, okay, what vision do you carry? But that's not enough, because what vision you carry is going to affect your behavior. Your behavior also affects your vision. Your behavior also affects your ruh. Your behavior also affects your qalb. All of those things, they're basically going to be affecting your own identity as a Muslim or a mu'min or a muhsin. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Did I explain that one, dear?
Yes, you did. You did.
All right.
Jazakallah khair, Ustad.
وإياكم وربي يحفظكم جميعا. So inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow. We've got a lot of things to do. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ya Rabbi grant us all al-Iman, grant us all as al-Ihsan, and grant us all inshallah ya Rabbi Jannah. If there are any questions, I could see some people already unmuted themselves, and go ahead, my friends.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
أنا حلفت يمين، قلت شهادتك يا ربي إني ما بعمل هذا العمل، وعملته.
نعم. إيش هو؟
عملته إشي
Oh,
يعني.
okay. You did something. Okay.
يعني قلت ما بعمله، بس في الظروف كلها أجبرتني إني أعمله.
Okay.
فهلأ هذا حنث يمين، لازم أصوم 3 أيام.
Okay, fair enough. So let me explain in English. So she said she had made an oath not to do a particular action, and yet she did it. But is that particular action, is it haram?
لا مو حرام.
Is it involving people's rights?
No. I have
No.
to pay money to some people, and I said I will not pay anymore. So, but
Okay. So
yeah.
two things. If it does not involve people's rights, that would what does it mean it doesn't involve people's rights? We're talking about, let's say, people's rights that you were witnessing. If it's not that, then where you had said, I'm not going to give money to this X or Y person. But then the Prophet ﷺ lets us know that من حلف على يمين فرأى غيرها خيرا منها فليأتي الذي هو خير وليكفر عن يمينه. The Prophet ﷺ basically said, whoever made an oath on any matter, فرأى غيرها خيرا منها, and then sees that something else was a better alternative, or was a better option, or was a better decision making, or was a better route. فليأتي الذي هو خير. Then do what now you had regret making an oath to not do, and do what is right. وَلْيُكَفِّرْ عَنْ يَمِينِهِ, and pay the expiation or the kafara for the oath that you had made. What is the kafara? The kafara is, number one, if there's a slave to free, then free a slave, but I don't have that anymore. So then, two, if you have the money to feed 10 poor people, with basically looking at the status of what you feed yourself. So let's say your daily meal is the cost of, let's just, give a random number. Let's say $15 is the price of a meal. Okay, this is just a hypothetical number. Okay, then in that situation, you're going to feed 15 times 10. So you're going to basically feed 10 people for basically a meal that is of an average cost of $15, for example. Okay. Now, what if you don't want to feed? You can make a big meal and, hey, go to, I guess, a refugee camp and, pass out 10 meals basically for these people. Okay. Or you can clothe them. So what are we going to do? We've got, hey, we're going to buy an attire, going to wear a pair of shoes, going to wear, let's say, a shirt and probably a jibba, okay, for 10 people. 10 people can include children, can include adults, can include women, etc. 10 people with 10 different clothes, 10 pairs of clothes. And then I'm going to basically give it to 10 or a family of 10, let's say it that way, a family of 10. And here we go. This is an XP. What if I don't want to do any of that? I mean, that's going to cost me a lot of money. Yeah, we know it's going to cost you a lot of money. If you are capable of affording that, then this is your only option. What if I cannot afford it? I'm just too poor. I myself am living on government assistance. Not me personally, but somebody might say, okay, living on government assistance. So what can I do? Then in that situation, we would say fast 3 days. But you know what? I know fasting 3 days is my option right now, but guess what? I'm diabetic. I can't fast 3 days. Then in that situation, we'll just ask you to make istighfar. That person didn't have money to donate and didn't have money or didn't have the physical power to fast. Then in that situation, we'll just ask istighfar. Just continue istighfar and take this matter seriously so you won't end up basically in this situation. Did I answer that one, Ahmed?
So I know if I want to fast 3 days, this is supposed to be after each other, not separate.
No, they don't have to be consecutive.
So from time to time, I can fast a day.
Yeah, you can fast, I don't know, Tuesday, and then later decide to fast maybe Thursday,
Okay.
and then another day you probably wanted to fast, I don't know, Saturday. That's
Okay.
okay.
Even fasting so difficult, the day so long. But I'm fasting now the 10 of Dhul Hijjah. So can I make, you mean?
Fair enough. This is called
Niyya.
tashriq fi niyya. Right. This is called tashriq fi niyya. What is tashriq fi niyya? Tashriq fi niyya basically means that you are overlapping with your intentions. What does that look like? I'm basically fasting the 10 days of Ashar min Dhul Hijjah, and plus I am making up Ramadan, or I'm fasting because of that oath that I made. Two differences of opinions. The first opinion basically said, no, you cannot do tashriq fi niyya because those are two different types of ibadah. That's the first opinion. The second opinion said you can overlap with intention because anyways, the fasting of Dhul Hijjah is not necessarily something that is considered as a separate ibadah or a separate ibadah, but it is basically just encouraging us during these days, the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, to basically engage in Qur'at Quran, engage in fasting, engage in tasbih, istighfar, and therefore the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, part of that is that you would engage in different types of ibadah, which may include an expiation or may include making up Ramadan. That's the second opinion. So the first opinion said you cannot overlap intention. The second opinion said you can overlap intention, at least with Dhul Hijjah.
زي اللي بيعملوا قضاء رمضان بيعملوه هلا ولهم لهم يعني أجل ذو الحجة.
There you go. That's the second opinion.
فممكن أعمل نية بس يعني أول مثلا من اليوم 3 أيام مشان حلفان اليمين وبكمله ذو الحجة بدون.
You can
أسماء
definitely
النية.
do that. That's a considerable opinion.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, my friends. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك